The sun stood heavy over the desert, and the sand looked like a giant sea made of gold. And in the middle of that endless land moved a slow wagon pulled by a tired horse whose steps carried the weight of both trust and hope, and beside the wagon lay a cowboy named Ramon who could not move his legs after a fall from a rocky ridge, and every breath he took felt like a fight against heat, wind, and fear. Ramon had once been known as a strong rider, and a man who helped any traveler he met. But now he lay in the back of the wagon while his wife Mira guided the reins with a face that had grown distant in ways he did not fully understand. And each time he tried to speak, she answered with short, sharp words that made the silence grow thicker around them. He looked at her, and tried to believe she still cared, yet something colder than the desert wind moved in her eyes, as if she carried a secret she refused to share. And when the wagon reached a lonely stretch where not even a cactus grew, she stopped the horse and looked at Ramon with a strange calm that made his heart twist. She stepped down and walked to him with water in her hand, but her voice held no warmth when she said that she could not do this anymore, and that the journey had become too heavy for her spirit. And before he could ask why, she stepped back and looked at the sky like someone searching for courage. The horse lifted its head as if sensing something wrong, and Ramon reached out to calm it, even though his hands felt weak from the heat. And Mira turned away from him and began taking her own bags from the wagon in a quick, nervous motion. And when he tried to sit up, pain shot through his legs and he fell back with a cry that the dry wind carried away. She looked at him one last time, and her eyes were filled with fear and confusion more than anger, and she said she had to save herself before she lost everything she had left in her heart. And with that she walked away toward the horizon, leaving the wagon, the horse, and the man she had promised to stand beside forever. Ramon felt the world tilt around him as the truth landed like a stone in his chest, and he breathed slowly, trying not to panic, because he knew that panic would steal his last strength. And the silence grew heavier as the sound of Myra's footsteps faded farther and farther, until even the wind swallowed her presence. The horse named Valor pushed its nose against Ramon's shoulder and breathed warm air across his face, as if trying to comfort him in the only way it understood. And Ramon lifted a shaking hand to touch the animal's neck and whisper that it was all right, even though nothing felt all right. He looked at the endless land around him, and understood that if the horse left he would not survive even a single day. And yet Valor stayed with gentle eyes full of loyalty stronger than fear. And the animal lowered itself beside the wagon, as if making a quiet promise that it would not leave the man who had once given it shelter, food, and kindness. Hours passed slowly, and the sun sank lower, painting the desert in long shadows while Ramon fought the rising fear inside him. But every time he looked at Valor, he felt a spark of courage returning like a small fire refusing to die. Night approached, and the cold began creeping over the land, but the horse stayed close, pressing its warm body against Ramon's arm as if guarding him from both darkness and loneliness. And as the first stars appeared, he felt a strange calm settle in his chest. The desert was wide, empty, and dangerous, yet he was not alone. And somewhere deep inside he knew that the bond between a cowboy and his horse could be stronger than any storm, betrayal, or fear. And with that thought, he prepared himself for the long, hard night ahead, trusting that Valor would guide him through whatever came next. The night stretched across the desert like a giant blanket of cold silence, and Ramon lay in the wagon with his back pressed against the wooden boards, trying to stay awake. Because sleep felt dangerous in a place where the wind carried strange sounds, and the sand moved with the slow crawling life of the land. And beside him Valor stood watch with ears twitching at every distant rustle, as if guarding him with the instincts of a loyal friend who understood the value of every breath the cowboy took. Ramon's hands shook from the cold creeping into his bones, and he tried to pull the thin cloth over his chest, but his weakened arms could not lift it high enough, so Valor stepped closer and pressed its warm side against the wagon, giving him enough heat to keep the shivers under control. And the cowboy whispered thanks in a tired voice that carried both gratitude and quiet sadness. He thought about Mira and wondered where she walked now, whether she felt fear or guilt or nothing at all, and he tried to understand how a heart that once held love could turn away so quickly, leaving him in a place where even the stars felt lonely. And as he stared at the dark sky, he felt pain stronger than the ache in his legs, because losing her trust felt heavier than losing his own strength. The wind grew louder, and a thin layer of sand slid across the wagon boards, making soft sliding sounds like whispers from the ground itself. And Ramon closed his eyes to steady his mind, reminding himself that he had survived storms, fights, and falls before, and that he still had the will to live, even if his legs refused to follow that will. And Valor lowered its head to nuzzle his shoulder again, giving comfort without asking for anything in return. As dawn approached, the cold faded slowly, and the sky turned a pale shade that looked like silver dust spreading across the horizon, and Ramon felt the first warmth of morning touch his face, bringing a small flicker of hope. And with that hope came a quiet decision forming in his mind, a decision that he would not die here, not while Valor stood at his side. When the sun rose fully, the desert began to glow with a harsh bright light, and Valor stepped into the warmth, stretching its legs before turning back to Ramon, as if waiting for his next thought, his next plan, his next breath. And Ramon placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling strength he wished he still had in his own body. He knew he needed water and shade, and he knew the wagon would not move without help, so he began speaking softly to Valor, telling the horse to pull lightly, telling it to try moving the wagon just a little to see if the wheels would settle into a workable path across the morning sand. And Valor listened with calm eyes before stepping forward and pulling the wooden frame one careful step at a time. The wheels groaned, but they moved, and Ramon felt a spark of relief spreading through his chest like a small fire returning to life, and he guided Valor with soft words, steady breaths, and gentle pats, because he understood that pushing too fast might harm the horse, and patience was the only tool he had left. The wagon rolled slowly across the open land, leaving trails behind them, and Ramon scanned the horizon for anything that looked like shelter, water, or even a sign of human life, but the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, with only the wind moving across the dunes like a spirit without shape. Yet he kept looking because hope was necessary for survival. Hours passed and the heat climbed higher, and Valor's steps grew heavier from the long pull, and Ramon could see sweat glistening on the horse's coat, a sign of both effort and loyalty that warmed his heart even as fear pressed against his thoughts. And he whispered encouragement, telling the horse to pause when the ground grew too hot and to move again when the wind brought a cooler breath across their path. By mid-morning Ramon felt dizzy from the heat, and his throat burned from dryness, and he leaned back against the wagon trying to keep his mind steady. And then in the distance he saw something that made his heart jolt, a line of dark shapes rising from the sand like low hills, but with edges too straight to be natural. He stared harder, eyes squinting against the light, and realized they were wooden posts, maybe fences, maybe remains of an old ranch that had been abandoned before he was born. And hope returned stronger this time, because where there were fences there might still be wells or shade, or even leftover supplies left behind by travelers who once lived there. Ramon guided Valor with soft words and slow movements, and the horse pulled the wagon toward the shapes, moving with renewed energy, as if it too felt the promise of something ahead. And as they came closer, the outlines became clearer, broken beams half buried in sand, a fallen water trough, and a structure that looked like a shed still standing though worn and fragile. Valor stopped near the shed, and Ramon reached out to touch the old wood, feeling splinters and cracks, but also solid strength beneath. And he asked the horse to nudge the wagon into a bit of shade cast by the leaning roof. And Valor obeyed with a soft snort of effort. The moment the wagon rested in the cool shadow, Ramon closed his eyes in relief, and breathed slowly, letting the shade calm the fire in his skin and the dryness in his mouth. And he looked around, searching for any sign of water, and then he saw it, an old metal pump standing crooked beside a half-collapsed stone ring. He asked Valor to help him down from the wagon by letting him hold onto the saddle strap, and the horse lowered its body slightly to make it easier, and Ramon used his arms to guide himself onto the hot ground, letting his legs rest without weight. And with slow movements he crawled toward the pump, feeling the rough sand scrape his hands but refusing to stop. When he reached the pump, he wrapped his fingers around the metal handle and pulled with all the strength left in his arms, but the pump stayed still, refusing to move, like a stubborn memory of the past. And for a moment fear returned, sharp and heavy. Yet he took a deep breath and pulled again, harder this time, using both arms and leaning his shoulder into the effort. A groaning sound echoed through the silence, and the pump shifted, then gave a small creak as if waking from years of sleep, and Ramon pulled again and again until a thin stream of water pushed out, then fell in a weak line into the sand. And though it was not much, it was enough to save survival. He cupped his hands and let the water gather for a moment before drinking deeply, feeling cool relief spread through his dry throat and aching chest. And then he guided Valor forward, letting the horse drink as well, watching with gratitude as his loyal friend lowered its head and took slow, careful sips. With water at hand and shade around them, Ramon felt strength begin to return, even though his legs still refused to answer him, and he knew that this place might give them a chance to rest, recover, and plan the next move, because the desert was dangerous but not unbeatable. He leaned back against the pump and looked at Valor, who stood watch beside him like a silent guardian, and he understood something that touched the deepest part of his heart. The horse had stayed not because it had to stay, but because it chose to stay, because loyalty was written into every breath it took. As the sun climbed higher, Ramon felt warmth, not from heat, but from gratitude and quiet courage, and he told himself that he would live, that he would find a way to reach help, that he would make it through this desert with Valor as his strength and his guide. The desert had taken much from him, but it had not taken his will to survive, and as long as his loyal horse stood beside him, he believed there was still a path forward waiting to be found. Ramon rested against the old pump and watched the desert sky shift from harsh white to a softer gold as the afternoon heat slowly began to fade, and in that fading light, he felt a small piece of strength return to his tired heart. Not enough to stand, not enough to walk, but enough to believe that he and Valor still had a chance to survive one more day, and sometimes one more day was all a man needed to find his way back to life. Valor stayed close to him like a silent shadow, moving only when Ramon asked and lowering its head every few minutes as if checking whether the cowboy still breathed and still fought against pain. And Ramon found comfort in that gentle loyalty stronger than any words could ever express, because in this quiet broken place the horse felt like the only living soul who cared about him. The small abandoned ranch around them looked almost peaceful under the softening light, the broken fence posts leaning like tired old men, the shed whispering with the wind through its loose boards, and the wide ring of stones around the pump showing signs of a life that once existed here, maybe a family, maybe travelers, maybe ranch hands who worked under the same sun and stars yet were long gone now. And Ramon wondered who they were and what stories had settled into this dry land. He tried to push his mind away from the memory of Mira walking into the horizon, leaving him behind, not because he wanted anger, but because the memory weakened his spirit, and he needed all the strength he could gather to face the long miles ahead. So he focused instead on breathing slowly, drinking water in small careful sips, and watching the land for any sign of hope. As the light softened further, he noticed a faint ridge far in the distance, shaped like a low hill rising above the flat lines of sand, and he stared at it, wondering if the ridge held caves or rocks, or even a small abandoned trail once used by riders passing through the desert. And he knew that any sign of human path could lead to help, so he kept the shape in his mind. Valor stepped beside him, nudging his arm gently, and Ramon understood that the horse wanted to keep moving when the evening brought cooler air, because nighttime travel would be safer and easier for both of them. So he pulled himself up with his arms and reached for the wagon, deciding they would leave as soon as the sun lowered completely. He checked the wagon and made sure the wheels still rolled even though they creaked like tired bones, and he filled a small old can with water from the pump, saving as much as he could because every drop meant another hour of life, another chance to hold on until morning. When the sun finally slipped behind the far dunes, the desert changed again, turning from gold to deep blue, and then to a cool, quiet gray filled with soft wind and distant rustling sounds that could have been small animals or shifting sand, or maybe just the whisper of the night itself. And Ramon felt calmer under the sky because the night no longer threatened him with heat, but offered a gentle cover. He guided Valor with soft words, asking the loyal horse to pull the wagon toward the distant ridge, and Valor obeyed with steady steps that carried determination, even in the dark. And Ramon held onto the side of the wagon, using the rhythm of the wheels to keep himself upright as the desert opened before them like a long, endless path waiting to be crossed. Hours passed, and the stars glowed bright above them, forming patterns that Ramon remembered from his younger days when he rode freely across open plains without pain in his legs and without worry in his heart. And those memories carried both sadness and strength because they reminded him of who he once was and of who he still wanted to be. As they continued forward, a soft sound reached his ears, a faint trickling like water moving over stone or wind brushing through leaves, and Ramon lifted his head with sudden alertness because water in the desert was rare and precious and could mean survival, so he asked Valor to slow down and listen. The horse paused and turned its ears toward the sound, and after a moment Ramon heard it again, clearer this time, a gentle flowing sound that did not match the dry, quiet land around them, and hope sparked inside him as he asked Valor to follow the direction of the sound. They moved left across a stretch of darker sand, and then around a tall dune until a small sight came into view that made Ramon's breath catch, a narrow stream flowing between two low rock formations, its surface shining like silver in the moonlight, and it looked almost unreal, like a gift from the night. Ramon reached down and touched the water and felt cool life against his fingers, bringing relief stronger than any words, and he asked Valor to drink while he washed the dust from his face and arms, letting the coolness calm him both inside and out. As they stayed near the stream, Ramon heard another sound, this time a soft shuffle behind the rocks, and he grew still, listening carefully because the desert held many creatures and he needed to know if this sound carried threat or safety. Valor lifted its head, ears pointed forward, and Ramon whispered for calm as he watched the shadows near the rocks shift slightly, and then from behind one of the stones stepped a small dog with a thin body, dusty coat, and eyes filled with fear and hunger. The dog froze when it saw Ramon and Valor, and Ramon spoke gently, telling the little creature it was safe, and that he meant no harm, and he extended a hand with a small drop of water in his palm. The dog hesitated, then slowly walked forward, sniffing carefully before licking the water from Ramon's hand with tiny trembling movements as if it had not tasted water in days, and Ramon felt his heart warm with compassion because he knew what it meant to be alone in a place that tried to swallow hope. He reached again into the bucket and offered more water, and the dog drank eagerly, then looked up at him with grateful eyes that reminded him of the simple kindness that still lived in the world, even in the middle of a harsh desert. The little dog circled once, then settled near the wagon, as if deciding to stay with them, and Ramon smiled softly at the sight, realizing that even in his weakest moment life had brought another companion, one more soul searching for survival. Valor approached the small dog slowly and sniffed it gently without threat, and the dog responded by wagging its tail in a timid, friendly way, showing trust to the bigger animal, and Ramon watched them with a comfort that settled deep inside him. He knew now that they had to keep moving when dawn arrived, because the ridge might hold more than they had seen, perhaps a trail, perhaps an old outpost, perhaps shelter, and he felt stronger with both Valor and the new small dog beside him guiding him forward. As the night stretched on, Ramon rested against the wagon, letting the sound of flowing water bring peace, while Valor stood guard, and the little dog curled close to his arm seeking warmth, and he understood that even in the darkest places life could still offer unexpected allies. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, gathering strength for the journey ahead, knowing that morning would bring new challenges but also new hope. And with two loyal companions at his side, he believed more than ever that he might reach safety, find help, and reclaim the life that had nearly been taken from him. Morning arrived slowly, as a soft pale light spread across the desert, turning the sand from deep gray to warm gold, and Ramon opened his eyes with a calm breath, feeling the gentle warmth of the small dog curled beside him, and the steady presence of Valor standing guard nearby. And for the first time since the moment he was left behind, he felt a sense of direction forming inside his heart, a feeling that he was no longer drifting but moving toward something real. The stream beside them shimmered under the rising sun, and Ramon reached down to splash a bit of water on his face, letting the coolness chase away the last traces of night weakness, and he whispered thanks for the water, the shade, the companions, and the small hope that had settled in his chest. Valor lowered its head to nuzzle Ramon's shoulder, as if reminding him that the journey was not over, and that they had much ground to cross before safety could be found. And the small dog stood and stretched, shaking dust from its fur, then trotted in a small circle, as if eager to move. Ramon looked toward the distant ridge they had seen the day before, now clearer under the new light, showing shapes that suggested rocks and maybe deeper shadows in between them, and he wondered again if there might be caves or paths left behind by travelers long ago. And he knew that if there was even a small chance of shelter or rescue, he had to try reaching it. He asked Valor to step close so he could pull himself into the wagon, using his arms and shoulders to lift his body, while his legs remained still and unresponsive, and Valor braced itself carefully, allowing him to settle into the wagon seat, where he could guide the horse with soft, gentle words. Once he was steady, he looked at the small dog and smiled softly, telling it to stay near the wagon. And the little animal wagged its tail, then leapt onto the wagon floor, settling beside him as if it had always belonged there. With the morning wind brushing across the open land, Ramon asked Valor to move, and the loyal horse began pulling the wagon with slow, steady steps that matched the rhythm of the rising day, and Ramon felt his spirits lift with every foot of ground they crossed. The desert stretched wide, yet something felt different now, maybe because he was not alone, maybe because he had survived another night, or maybe because hope had taken root stronger than fear. And he looked at the path ahead with eyes that no longer saw only danger but also possibility. As they continued, the ridge grew clearer, and details began to appear, small cracks in the stone, long shadows marking uneven ground, and a cluster of dark shapes at the base of the ridge that did not look like rocks at all. And Ramon leaned forward, trying to understand what those shapes could be. When they came closer, he realized the shapes were remains of an old trail marker half buried in the sand, with wooden posts standing like tired guards around a narrow winding path that led upward into the stone heart of the ridge, and his heart beat faster with a mix of surprise and relief. He knew trail markers meant someone had once used this path, maybe travelers, maybe riders, maybe a small trading group moving between towns, and even though the markers were old and broken, they still told him that humans had passed through here. Ramon asked Valor to follow the beginning of the path, and the horse stepped forward with careful movements, placing its hooves on the firmer ground, where the sand had thinned and the rocks provided more support. The small dog stood at the edge of the wagon, watching the rising path with curiosity, then barked once, a short sound that echoed gently across the hollow space between the rocks, as if encouraged by the discovery. The path wound upward slowly, giving them shade from the rising heat as the tall rock walls caught the sun on their upper edges, leaving the lower ground cooler and easier to travel. And Ramon felt the relief of shade wrapping around him like a quiet blessing. They reached a narrow turn where the air felt cooler, and a faint, earthy smell drifted from ahead, as if the land held moisture deep within its rocks, and Ramon felt his heart lift again because where there was moisture there might be plants, and where there were plants there might be animals, or even human settlers who lived near the ridge. As they moved forward, the path widened into a small open space between two rock walls where patches of green appeared, small shrubs growing near cracks where water dripped like quiet tears from the stone. And Ramon reached down to touch one of the leaves, feeling life where he expected only dryness. Valor stepped closer to the shrubs and took slow, careful bites while the small dog sniffed around the edges searching for insects or drops of water, and Ramon watched them with a warm feeling because seeing his companions eat gave him strength even though his own hunger had become a quiet ache. He pulled a small piece of dried food from an old bag and broke it into tiny pieces, giving some to the dog and some to Valor, and though the food was little, the act of sharing made his heart feel full. After a short rest, Ramon asked Valor to continue, and they followed another bend that opened into a wider canyon with tall rocks rising high like walls built by nature, and the ground below them became firmer, almost like a natural road shaped by years of wind and footsteps. Then as they reached the middle of the canyon, Ramon saw something that made him pause, a small wooden structure built against the rock wall, partly hidden by shadow, its roof made of dried branches, and its sides reinforced by flat stones and wooden boards. The structure looked old yet strong enough to stand against storms and sand, and Ramon felt a deep surge of hope, because this could be a shelter left behind by someone who once lived here or someone who passed through often enough to keep supplies. He guided Valor closer, and saw that the small shelter had a door made of planks held together by rope, and a single piece of cloth hanging from the top edge like a curtain moving gently in the wind, and he reached out with a steady hand to push the door open. Inside he saw a simple room with a low table made of stone, a few empty jars, a coil of rope, a broken lantern, and to his surprise a small pile of wood stacked neatly in the corner, as if someone had once planned to return. The air smelled faintly of dust and dried herbs, and the room held a quiet stillness that felt safe rather than abandoned, and Ramon felt gratitude pour through him because this was a place where they could rest away from heat and wind. He asked Valor to step into the shade while he checked the room more closely, and the small dog ran inside, sniffing every corner with excitement as if exploring a treasure cave. Ramon touched the wooden table, the rope, the jars, and the stones, feeling the stories of whoever built this place, and wondering how they lived, how they traveled, and why they left. As he explored the corner of the room, he found something he did not expect, a folded piece of cloth with a marking stitched on the edge, a symbol shaped like a rising sun above a mountain, and he recognized it. It belonged to an old rider group known for helping travelers lost in difficult lands, a group respected for their kindness and courage, and Ramon's heart beat faster, because if this shelter belonged to one of them, then there was a chance they still traveled through this ridge. He lifted the cloth and placed it across his lap, feeling new strength spread through him because he realized he was closer to help than he ever imagined. Valor nudged him gently, as if sensing his rising hope, and the small dog curled beside his leg, looking up with bright, grateful eyes. Ramon breathed slowly and let the shade cool his skin, the shelter calm his mind, and the presence of his loyal companions steady his heart. He knew the journey was not finished, and danger might still wait on the other side of the ridge, but for the first time he believed help was truly within reach. With courage returning, and a new sense of direction, he prepared for the final steps ahead, knowing that tomorrow could bring the turning point he had prayed for since the moment he was left in the desert to die. Ramon woke before sunrise with a steady breath, and a warm feeling of hope settling into his chest, as the quiet shelter held a soft calm around him, and the small dog slept curled by his arm while Valor stood at the entrance watching the dim light grow in the canyon, and for the first time since he had fallen from the ridge, he felt that this day would bring an answer one way or another. He placed his hand on the dog's back and whispered a gentle word, then reached up to rub Valor's neck, giving thanks for their loyalty, strength, and courage, because without them he would have been lost long ago. And as he looked at the opening of the canyon, he saw the sky turning from deep blue to pale gold, spreading warm color across the rock walls. The morning wind carried a soft scent of sand and herbs, and Ramon breathed it in, letting it fill his tired body with new energy. And he told himself that today they would move farther into the ridge, because somewhere ahead a path must lead toward human life, and if the old rider group still used this route, they might find him before the day ended. He pulled himself into the wagon with slow, careful strength, using his arms to lift his weight, and the small dog jumped beside him with a quick shake of excitement, while Valor stepped into position ready to pull as soon as Ramon spoke, and when he was settled he asked the horse to move forward. The canyon path twisted gently as they continued deeper between the tall rocks, and the cool morning air made the journey easier than the harsh desert heat they had faced before. And Ramon took in every detail: the widening trail, the scattered shrubs, the faint marks in the dirt that looked like old hoofprints, and the quiet sound of wind echoing softly against stone. After some time the canyon floor began to rise and the walls opened wider, creating a long valley between two ridges, and Ramon felt his heart beat faster because valleys often led to outposts or old ranches where riders stopped for shelter, water and supplies, and he watched carefully for anything that could show human presence. Valor continued steadily pulling the wagon over smooth ground until they reached a point where the valley curved gently to the right, revealing a stretch of land where grass grew in patches beside flat stones, and the air carried a fresher scent as if water was not far away, and Ramon felt renewed hope rising. The small dog barked once and stood at the edge of the wagon looking ahead with alert eyes, and Ramon followed its gaze until he saw something standing on a distant rise, a tall wooden post with a carved symbol on top, a rising sun over a mountain, the same symbol he found in the shelter. His breath caught in his chest because this symbol belonged to the old rider group, the ones known for guiding lost travelers and protecting routes across dangerous lands, and he felt a warm rush of relief because this meant they were close, maybe within minutes, maybe within a short ride. He asked Valor to move faster, and the loyal horse lifted its pace with new energy, as if sensing the importance of the moment, and the wagon rolled forward following the line of the valley toward the wooden post. And as they came closer, Ramon saw the ground below the post packed and smooth like a place used often by riders who passed through. Then he noticed something else, a faint trail of smoke drifting above the rise, soft and thin but clear against the sky, and he felt emotion swell in his throat because smoke meant a fire, and a fire meant people. Valor slowed on its own as they reached the rise, and Ramon looked over the ridge into a small hidden basin, where he saw a camp built neatly between two low hills with 2 tents, a stack of supplies, a small corral, and 3 horses grazing nearby. The smoke rose from a fire pit where a pot hung above glowing coals, and beside the fire sat an older man with calm eyes and strong posture, wearing a vest with the same rising sun symbol stitched across the chest. And when the man looked up, he froze in surprise at the sight of Ramon, Valor, and the small dog. For a moment the valley held complete silence, then the older man stood with quick, purposeful steps and walked toward them, his face filled with concern and steady determination, and Ramon's heart pounded with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The man reached the wagon and placed a hand gently on Ramon's shoulder, asking with clear worry what had happened, who had hurt him, and how long he had been in the desert. And Ramon told him in simple words that he had fallen, that he could not move his legs, and that he had been left behind in the desert with only Valor at his side. The older man listened with deep understanding in his eyes and nodded slowly as he assessed Ramon's condition and the loyalty of the horse standing beside him, and he said with firm kindness that Ramon was safe now, that he would be taken to their main outpost where healers and supplies could help him recover. 2 more riders stepped from the tents when they heard the voices, one young, one middle-aged, both wearing the same symbol and both looking shocked at the sight of Ramon's condition, yet impressed by the fact that Valor had kept him alive through the long, harsh journey. The older man placed a hand on Valor's neck and spoke softly, praising the horse for its strength, courage, and devotion, calling it a rare companion whose loyalty was deeper than fear and stronger than any storm, and Valor lowered its head as if understanding the words. The riders gathered around and gently lifted Ramon from the wagon, carrying him with care toward a softer bed inside one of the tents, and the small dog followed close behind, refusing to leave his side for even a moment. They gave him cool water, warm broth, and clean cloth to rest on, and Ramon felt his body loosen with relief as the riders worked with quiet skill, making sure he was comfortable and safe, and he watched them with gratitude filling his chest because kindness from strangers in such a lonely land felt like a blessing he would never forget. As he rested, the older man returned and sat beside him, telling him that they would send a message to the nearest town where a doctor could be brought to examine his legs, and he assured Ramon that he would not face this challenge alone. Ramon looked outside the tent and saw Valor standing tall among the other horses while the small dog curled close to his boots like a loyal guardian, and he felt tears gather in his eyes, not from pain but from the deep warmth of knowing he was safe, that he had survived because of the bond he shared with his animals. He whispered a quiet thank you to Valor, and the horse lifted its head as if answering in its own gentle language. Ramon closed his eyes and let the morning warmth wash over him, understanding now that even though he had been abandoned, betrayed, and left to die, the love and loyalty of one horse and one small dog had carried him through a desert that could have ended his life. And as the riders prepared the outpost around him, he knew that this was not an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter where he would heal, grow, and live again with gratitude as deep as the desert sky. For the man who had once been left alone to die had now found a place where hope lived again, and the bond between him and his loyal animal companions would be remembered for the rest of his life.